Hello, everybody. Hello. I know, post-lunch coma, it's okay. Happens all the time when we go out to lunch with everybody. We get back to the office, it's like, oh. Nobody ever wants to do work after lunch. And of course, sitting through a presentation is, so. Anyway, this is Intro to Reposado. If you're looking for something else, you're in the wrong room. So if you're here to learn about a piece of software that can help you with managing updates, welcome. So, who am I? Well, I'm Braden Penglase, also known as, which you can't really see on here, but you can see it in the slides. If you're on IRC or most of the interwebs, I'm otherwise known as Setterox or Penglase. Those are my two aliases I go as online. So if you see either of those, that's most likely me. And if I've ticked you off in some way, I apologize. My first and primary job is Pennsylvania College of Technology. About 6,000, 6,500 students or so. 4 years working there. Mixed OD80 environment, about 300 Macs. Recently, it's kind of jumped. We were only managing about 75 because we were only doing the administrative side and like one lab of the academic side. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, we're going to take on this other academic side that's kind of been its own little group. So now we're all working together, and now I can count in about 300. So, and in that job, mainly utilizing, besides the normal Apple stuff, Deploy Studio Monkey. With Deploy Studio, obviously pushing images out, taking images, taking backups, that sort of thing. And then Monkey to manage general updates, third-party updates, and just generally keeping the system up to date. Recently, as of a year ago, I happened to come across an opportunity to do some side consulting with RPA Inc. Incorporated. Basically, executive consulting firm, pure Mac environment, which I thought was kind of neat for my area. Didn't really do anything. But they had a lot of problems with all the different consulting groups in the area trying to get their server together. They originally had two, merged it. I got them to merge to one. Other people have tried it, all sorts of permission problems, whatnot. But got them settled. So I've been helping them out. They're not huge, 17 Macs. We actually do have one remote over a pfSense VPN, actually. Well, OpenVPN, but over pfSense, up in Boston. And there, I'm also using Deploy Studio, but 17 Macs, there's not really that many updates to do often, so it's not really worth mentioning. But do use Monkey extensively to keep everything up to date. When I came into the picture, everybody was kind of like on their own machines and doing whatever they wanted and that sort of thing. Well, when I came into the picture and we upgraded everybody to 10.6 and made them non-admin, which was kind of nice. Stopped a lot of the extra stuff and software getting installed. Granted, it did cause some problems because like, occasionally Adobe will come along and say, hey, I need to update and give me the admin password. And everybody's like, I don't have it anymore. So some things that way, but we, little tweaks here and there. It's worked out. And then we use Reposado extensively there. Because at least originally I think there was even a couple 10.4 boxes. So, and the server at the time was 10.4 and then 10.6 got upgraded. And then now, haven't gone to 10.7 yet, but we're serving 10.7 clients already. So now, enough about me, into this. What is Reposado? Or more like, what is it not? Well, it's not this. Apparently when they came up with the naming, some people thought it was the tequila. It's not that. This is software. Although managing Macs can lead to this, but it is not an iOS update server or cache. If you're looking to update or keep local updates for iOS, like say when all the different updates of 4.3.4, 5, all that, through iTunes, it does not handle that. That's a whole separate beast in itself, which, to my knowledge, I don't think there's any sort of local replication for that yet. And I say yet because who knows? It is not a client update mechanism. This is just server backend stuff. What you actually do on the client is handled separately. This is handled by Apple's normal software update. You can use Monkey. From what I hear, there's other products. Jamf, I think, does it. I'm not sure about Tivoli. There's some recent conversation I was involved with that I'm not sure if it goes against the server or you tell it to do these updates. But basically, it doesn't touch the client. Nothing about Reposado goes on the client. The only thing you do there is tell whatever software you're using on the client, which could be any number of things, to point back to Reposado. That's it. And it doesn't do the third-party updates. So things like Firefox, Flash, Adobe, anything Adobe, Google, which kind of has its own update, it doesn't host any of that stuff. That, again, is all handled third-party in itself, like Monkey. Monkey's awesome for that, which I don't know if the session's already happening. It might be happening now, but definitely attend them. Monkey's good. So what is Reposado? Well, straight off the GitHub, which is basically its main website. It's a set of tools written in Python to replicate the key functionality of the OS X server update. Or in other words, it allows you to have a local cache of updates for just about any operating system, on any operating system you want, for versions 10.4 through the current testing OS. So just recently, in the GitHub stuff, Greg Neagle, just put code in to handle Mountain Lion updates. So if you're testing that and you want to have local cache of all the updates, this will do it for you. So why Reposado? Well, Apple's update service can be very finicky. I'm sure if you're here, you've probably handled it at some point or another and found that it can kind of be just plain out wanky. It can fail randomly. I've had different times, multiple times actually, that I've had to go and re-download everything. For some reason or another, it just craps out its database, and you need to grab everything again, which at the current time, my database is 55 gig. What's that? Yeah, at the current time. So if you're tired of that happening, another reason to do it. It's limited in how it offers the updates. And what I mean by that is when you go into Apple's update service, you have the updates come down. It syncs typically nightly. I believe you can set the time. When you can then go in and see the updates, but your only choices are to either offer everything or have to constantly nitpick and every time new updates come in, check them to be offered. But you cannot, if you point a client to it, you can't offer, like say if you have two clients, this one's testing, this one's production, you can't offer this one separate updates than this one. So you're either offering everybody everything, or everybody a certain set, or everybody nothing. It's also limiting client versioning. Basically, with Apple's update, you can only offer up to the version that you're running. So most people, at least that I've heard, are still sitting on 10.6 server, some even older. You can only offer up to that version. 10.5 server won't offer 10.6 and 10.7. 10.6 won't offer 10.7 and 10.8 when it comes out, and so on and so on. If you're still on 10.4, well, you can only offer 10.4 clients. Your 10.5, 6, and 7 are now out in the wind. So, and it's also only available on Apple's OS X server. This has become a problem in more recent times because a lot of people are starting to move away from server and either moving into an ESXi cluster, or ESX, vSphere, whatever their term of the week is for it, that they have their own infrastructure and kind of want to consolidate everything onto that, so it's requiring that you need something else. And unless if you have a specific build of the Xserve, you can't put ESXi on it, so then you can't run Mac in it. Even though there's nothing legally legally restricting, yes. Technically restricting, no. But that's another whole thing. So, and why not? Just because it's something new, you get to play with it. Fun. One downside I do want to mention: at the current time, there is no official GUI for it. It's all command line based. So anything you want to do, it's terminal. If you're not that comfortable in terminal and you want to use it, we'll get to that in a little bit. But there are, as of right now, it's just some command line tools to run. So, but that's really the only downside, that some people aren't necessarily comfortable with it. Other people, if you've been doing it for a very long time, you're used to scripting and you're going to be used to living in the terminal. Or if you're used to Linux, terminal. So, what do I need? Well, you actually don't need a whole lot to do it. Basically, you need a computer, something to house it. Obviously, you need an internet connection. You have to talk back to Apple to get the updates. I guess in theory, you could download the updates in another place, bring them in a hard drive and load them off, but Do you really want to go through that hassle? So internet connection's good. Now, I say about 70 gigs of storage, and this is giving a lot of extra space. As of right now, my current repository is sitting at about 55 gig. So it's fairly large. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is when you're getting, when you're caching local updates, you're also caching the updates, like when you're doing line, you're also caching the line recovery partition too. That's 500, 700 meg in itself. So the combo updates tend to be gig plus, so as more and more of that comes out, you're going to take up more and more space. So I would say 60 gig minimum, but especially if it's on its own partition, then you're getting file system limits and stuff like that. So I'm recommending about 70 gig is a good round number for right now. Some sort of web server software. You can run it on an old Solaris box if you want to. But basically, any web server doesn't not matter. As long as you can take a directory and offer it out to the world via HTTP, it's perfectly fine. I know a guy recently who's writing his own web server in Node.js, JS Node, something like that. And you could use that if you wanted to. So, and for non-macOS machines, you need curl, just basic web-git stuff. But basically, it uses curl to actually go and get the updates from Apple. And then Python greater than or equal to 2.6. If you read the official documentation, they do say 2.5. Well, I should say Greg says. But he does say 2.5, but the problem is with 2.5, you had to do some extra stuff to get plist support in it for other operating systems in Mac. So. But apparently starting with 2.6, that was all built in and released to all the other operating systems. So basically all you just need is the latest version of Python, which I think 2.7 I think is the latest 2-line, and then there's like 3.1 or 3.01 for the 3-line of things. I haven't heard anything if 3 will work or not. I'm assuming it will. But okay, so this is intro 2. The big thing I wanted to cover was one-for-one replacement. Basically going in saying, okay, I already have a system in place. I just want a little bit more fine-grained control or for whatever not reason that you want to have from previous slides. Or you're doing away with your OS X servers, you move to local MCX, you need to put it on your client under Ubuntu, CentOS, Windows, whatever your organizational policy is. So what we will assume in this case is that you have an Apple Mac. Could be anything. Could be an old Mac Mini, could be an Air that somebody didn't want anymore, crack the screen on, you can throw in the corner, anything. We're going to assume in this case that's 10.7, so I guess in this case it needs to be a newer machine. We're going to use the built-in web server. It's basically Apache in OS X. And then this isn't required, but highly suggested, is to have either Xcode, or with 10.7, you can have just the Xcode command line tools. And I'll get into this or I'll mention why once we get into actually getting Reposado.
It could be an OS X client.
Yes. No. This is just for like an example, like I'm running through a one-for-one replacement. So this is just an example of setting it up. In this case, I just used OS X server and just to show you the basic setups. But yes, it can be absolutely anything. As I said in the beginning, it could just be, I think client still includes a web server, the personal web server. So you could offer it off out of that, yes. So it's as long as you can point a web client to it and get access to it, it can do it. So, and even if you want to, you can install WAMP, XAMP, or sorry, MAMP, XAMP, any of that stuff on client, and it'll do it too, just to get the web stack in there at least. But yes, this will apply also to client. Again, this is just one-for-one replacement, so just an example of how to set them. I suggest adding a user account just for Reposado. They always say it's good to run stuff non as root and all that kind of stuff, so make an account just for Reposado. I call it Reposado. Woohoo. You can put any password you want. It could be, super really long password. I would recommend something at least human typable, or not necessarily memorizable if you have some kind of password service that you use. because you do want to go into it occasionally, and I'll go into it here. But basically, create your account, and then you want to create some sort of repository directory. In this case, we're going to assume /reposado. Doesn't have to be on the root. You could create a whole nother drive for it, so it'd be /volume /reposado repo / whatever. Doesn't have to be anything specific. Just in this example, we're going to do /reposado, just to make it easy. And keep commands in this case short. So the only two other directories you have to create are HTML and metadata. I know there's different functionalities to each. The HTML is basically where a lot of the content is stored up from. And then the metadata, I believe, is just for the internal database stuff. Yes?
Those have to be subfolders of the main directory?
Yes. Whatever repo directory you pick, they have to be in that. It's basically, this is the directory you're telling Reposado to work in. And not so much where the tools are. That's a little different. This is just what's being offered to clients. Basically, when we get into the web stuff, this Reposado directory is actually the one that's going to be shared on the web server. So when you go to set it up, it's whatever that site is, or that directory is that you're going to be sharing out. But yes, so those two are the only two directories that have to be there. You can throw in other stuff if you want, like if you already have a website set up that you use for like internal updates, like Monkey, for example, you could also throw this in on that too. So it doesn't have to be its own, but if you're doing things like separating out from directories or drives or separate RAID or throw it on a different SAN somewhere, that's what you kind of want to do. So, but then if you did create a separate user account, you need to change permissions on it because the tools will need to access this directory. So it handles it, but, and again, if you didn't do that and you're just running it as your user or root user, you don't have to worry about that. So, how to get it. I'm going to kind of split into two parts here. I'm going to assume with the command line tools installed, and then I'm going to assume without the tools installed. So this way you can see both ways of getting it. With the tools installed, which is the recommended method, and I'll explain to you here, basically go into your destination. Now, the Reposado destination here, I specify as the location that you want the tools to sit at. So if you created a separate user, I would recommend that user's home directory. Let's see, at RPA, I actually set it up under USR local Reposado. And then actually when I created the user later on, I just made that the home directory of the user. So it can be anywhere. But this is where you want the tools to reside. If you have a specific spot like USR local, throw it all there. And then you want to run this command. How many of you guys are familiar with Git, at least cloning stuff? Okay, so a little less than half. Basically, you don't really have to know too much about it, just this command that you run. Git, which is revision control system, and then you want to clone what's out there, and then you provide the Git file for it, which just tells it where to get it and what's in it and all that fun stuff. And then whatever directory that you want to actually put it in, which is that. So in this case, let's say I created a user Reposado. It's in /users Reposado as its home directory. Then when I clone, I'm in the home directory. I run this command. When I do ls or pwd, whatever not, it'll return /users /reposado/reposado. And that's where all the tools then reside. Kind of redundant, but works. In the case of what I was saying with RPA, they had, with already having it set up under USR local, I didn't have any of the extra stuff there. I just cloned it directly into the Reposado. Like I actually did it in USR local and then did the clone to Reposado so that when I made the home directory it's just there. That's, as soon as you go into that user, that's where the tools reside. The reason that I recommend this method is because he doesn't necessarily release versions, like say version 1, version 2, 0.0.2, whatever you want to name it. When you want to update, like say for example, just recently you already had it in place, and you go, I've been testing Mountain Lion and I want to get the local repository set up. I'll try setting it, updating the code for this. All you have to run is git pull. in whatever location that you have your tools. And it will go out to the server and say, hey, where's all these updates? And it will bring the updates down to your system, and then you have it locally up, and then your Reposado is up to date. You don't have to mess around with any tools. You don't have to download anything else. It just doesn't. So, whereas if you, in the next spot, which I'll get to in a second, if you go and get the tarball and you download it, extract it, and set it up, you'd have to do that each and every time you want to update Reposado. So this gives you a nice, easy update functionality. Granted, if you're using it in production, you might not necessarily want to do that. You might want to test it first, whatever your organizational policies are. So, now to... Nope, that's fine.
Do you have your tool directory named Reposado?
No. The only restriction is that when the tools come down, any method that you pick, you will have the code folder. Crap, I can't remember off the top of my head. There's a code folder and a couple other folders. Those are the only ones that you actually need. Yeah, when it comes down, you want to keep them named that way. But where they reside doesn't matter. The only thing that matters for is just so you know where to point stuff to run. If you go in and type your commands to sync or whatever not, you want to know where to go to do that. That's really the only spot to go. And actually, using this method, when you extract the tarball, it actually defaults, and I guess I'll say this again in a minute, but it actually defaults to wdas-reposado- and then the Git version, whatever it happens to be at that point in time. So it can be the main directory can be anything. To do it without the code, you want to go out to their website on the GitHub. When you go under their directory, you'll see all the code and everything listed, and it might look really confusing. But all you have to do is go out there, and then in the upper right-hand corner, there's a downloads button. And when you click, when you click that, lunch, you have download as.zip and then download as.tar.gz. Really doesn't matter which one you pick. They're both going to get you the same thing. One might be slightly smaller than the other because of the compression. I'm just recommending the tar.gz because that's what I'm used to with handling everything. Yeah.
So the only tool you're using from command line tools is Git?
At that point in time. Just to get Reposado, yes. We'll get into more, once you actually start using the utilities of Reposado, that's when you start doing more in terminal. So, but to actually get it, that's the only thing so far. Then you want to move the download to your destination, or you want to extract it first, either or. If you're, say, downloading it in your home directory, which is probably what you're going to do, download it, you can extract it, and then once you have that file, then you can take that file and shove it anywhere, or sorry, folder, and shove it anywhere you want. That's the tools folder. That's just what's holding the commands that are going to actually create your local sync. So, but you can put it anywhere. And then, like I said, in this case, when you extract from this, everything ends up in the wdas-reposado-git version folder. So in that case, I recommend changing it to just Reposado, just to make it easy. Because the other thing is, each time that you go and get a new update, it's going to name that folder a different name. So this way, if you rename it, it's all your scripts and everything that you might write against it stay consistent. Now the configuration part. There's not a whole lot to this either. Basically, if you do what I suggested in the beginning and have a local account set up, you want to go into that account. Any fashion, and this is using terminal, by the way. I usually do su space dash space username, and then it asks you for the password of that account. You type in your 64 hexadecimal alphanumeric password, super secure, and then you're in your destination. So at that point, in that home users folder, then you want to go into whatever directory you called it. If you called it Reposado, if you called it My Local Update Server, My Little Pony, whatever you wanted to call it, you would go into that directory. So then run this command. // to tell it to run locally. Under code, which is where the main utilities reside, and then it's repo util. I believe that there's two main commands, repo util and repo sync, which we'll get to in a little bit. But this one you run with --command, or command, configure, and then it will go through the configuration process, which is all of 3 steps. First one, ask you where the HTML directory is. When we first created the repository directory, you did the /HTML. You need to tell it where that is. One of the things you can do is if you have that up in Finder, you can drag the title bar down over to it. It'll drop the path in. The only thing you need to do is delete the extra space that it adds. Otherwise, it's not going to like that. So, and then you want to do the same thing for the metadata folder. Both folders, just point to where that is. Like I said earlier, in this case, everything I'm putting in is under /reposado. Just point it out to /reposado/HTML metadata. And then the last configuration option it will ask you for is where the updates actually reside. Now, this is a one-for-one update, or sorry, one-for-one replacement to Apple's. So we're going to be pulling down all of the updates that Apple has. So we're going to configure the web server next, but you're going to want to set up your URL here. In this case, do a one-for-one replacement again. So server name and then port 8088 as the default update port for at least Apple's utilities. So now to configure the web server. Beginning part's a little easy. Second part's a little fun. So you want to open up server.app. Again, this is on 10.7, so this is assuming the newer interface, which I'm not the biggest fan of server.app, but that's me. You want to go to the web service, assuming that you already have it set up. If not, you can just turn it on. And actually, I think it's there anyway. If you don't actually have to go in and check it as a different service now. But anyway, go into the web service and you hit plus to create a new site because you want to start a new one up. Then in it, you want to, there's not many options that you can pick from when you actually set up a web server now. So you want to enter the domain name for what you want to use. So the example I gave earlier was my.server.com. And then you want to change the port from just 80 to 8088 since we're going to make it a full one-for-one replacement. And then you need to tell it where the directory is. So it says store sites files in, and then basically you want to browse out to wherever your HTML directory is. So in our case, it was under /reposado. So then you just browse out to that, hit the HTML directory, hit OK, and that's pretty much it for that, for selecting that. Then at least I recommend going in under the index files. It lists index.php, index.html, the standard default websites. Just go ahead and delete them. You're not going to use them at all, at least for Reposado. If you're combining this with something else that you already have in place, like say Monkey or something, you don't need to do this. You can just throw the directories in there and you're fine. You just need, when you configure Reposado, you need to tell it what to use. And then click done. That's the GUI part of the web server. Now you want, and this is again for one-for-one replacement, you don't have to do all of this. You want to open up Terminal and go into, take a look at /etc Apache 2 sites. This will show you sites that are available and configured. The way that they're actually listing it is in this fashion here. At least when I configured mine, it was 0000. Then the IP address that I used, which when I configured the server was 127.0.0.1, port 8088. And then domain name, my.server.com. You want to go into that and go to the very bottom, but just above the /virtualhost line. If you're familiar with with Apache's web server config, this kind of looks familiar to you, at least that last part. So then once you have that, once you're in there, you want to paste this 4 different times. And what you want to do is change the number after Darwin and the links that it goes to here. Basically what this is doing, and I have a link at the end of the presentation that once you get, you can take a look at. It's actually the site I got all this from. What this is doing is called rewrites. Basically by default, the Apple Mac clients will go out to the update server and just ask it for index.su catalog. That's all fine and dandy, but the default index.su catalog is for 10.4. So if you hit that with your 10.5 clients, your 10.6 clients, even your Mountain Lion clients, they're not going to get anything besides like iTunes. They're not going to get like 10.6.8 v11, 10.7.3. They're not going to get any of that. So what this does, and this is actually what Apple does on the software update server, is they have a bunch of rewrite tools that will go through, and that when you hit the server with the specific client, in this case Darwin 9, 9 is for leopard, 10's for snow leopard, 11's for lion, and I'm assuming 12 is going to be for mountain lion, but I don't know for sure. But basically, you set that up, and then when the client goes and hits index.su catalog, the server says, actually, no, you want this, and then offers the URL for that operating system in replace of that. So if you're not comfortable modifying the website or anything, or the, web server stuff, you don't have to do this. Again, this is just one-for-one replacement. This is literally that you could go to a client, like if you're doing it on the same server as your update, you can do all this except for turn on your web server, and then turn off the Apple Update server and turn on your web server, and that's it. Your clients will never notice a difference. So, since we have all this set up, the next part you want to kind of replicate is a nightly sync. Since this kind of varies depending on the OS, the way that you really want to do it in Mac OS is launch daemons, Linux, cron tab, cron job, however you want to call it. Windows, I believe, is the Windows scheduler. But it's different for each one, so there's going to be different ways. This, since we're doing a one-for-one replacement on an Apple box, we're just going to do a launch daemon. This is one I came up with. Don't try to read that. Good luck if you can. It's out there on that URL, which if you're not familiar with osxdeployment.com now, .info has been sold off. .com is osxdeployment.com, very, very good resource for all sorts of different things. It's kind of a little resource that a bunch of us little sysadmins have been trying to put together to just kind of, oh, you got these one-off scripts, here you go, and throw them out there for different things. Like I have a, off topic, but I have a Kerberos printing script that I have out there. But so if you do want to use this, that's it. Basically, I know you can't really read this, but basically you go through, it's labeled for, I kind of say to create it, since you're creating it yourself, to do the labeling as your organization. So for example, if you're, like my domain that I have here in the example is edu.pct, put that in there. You can really call it whatever you want. You don't have to call it Reposado Sync. You can call it my best script, whatever. But basically, it goes through, I don't think I have a laser pointer, do I? Nope, guess not. The first little block that's kind of long is the command. You list where the commands, the utilities found. Basically, where you pulled the tools down, you need to point it to that. Then it lists the command, which the command itself is the repo_sync, which all that really does is just sync your repository down. So it specifies that, and then it also specifies for a log file. So anything that runs, it gets logged. Which in my opinion is good, because if it fails, you kind of want to know. Then the next block is the calendar start date. When do you want it to run? You can list it multiple times, so if you want to run it at midnight and noon, you can do that. In this specific example, I have it syncing, I think, at 5 a.m. Yeah. This specific one goes to 5 a.m. Since we have other services run at like 3, and actually, our other services run earlier, and then our backups run at 3. So I figured I'd give plenty of time after our backups have run to actually do the sync, because this isn't synced with the backup stuff. Then it says which user to run it as. We want to run it as Reposado user, not root or anything like that. On demand, yes, because you just want it, when it loads up, you want it to go. So if your server reboots, it will sync. You could turn it off if you wanted to. Actually, that's the next one, run on load. So this way, if your server reboots, it'll try to sync. You can turn that off if you want. I think if the server reboots, why not? Then the last 2 blocks I found, I've kind of been using a couple of scripts I've written. They're not needed. You don't need to use them. But it's to basically catch any STD error or STD out that comes out of the script that doesn't get caught in the log. It'll log it to these 2 locations. They're different logs. They're the same thing, just with dash STD error and log out on that. So at that point, you're pretty much done. Woo, you can pat yourself on the back. It's all set up. So, well, kind of. At this point, you can either run a manual sync or let the nightly run go. At this point, you haven't actually replicated the updates yet. You either want to run the repo sync yourself, go into user, type in basically the same command as you has, but just repo sync, and then just watch it bring down all the updates. And if you want to watch every single one, you're going to be sitting there for a very, very long time. As we mentioned before, it's about 55 gig in its current state. If you have a really fast connection, or an I think updates or Apple updates default to Akamai now, maybe. So if you're lucky enough to have a local Akamai cache on site, you probably don't even want to do this, but it would be really fast coming down. Otherwise, it will take quite a while. I usually let it go overnight when I first set it up. Again, once this is done and synced, obviously you want to test it first, but then you can just drop it right in place. If you're doing it on the same server that you currently have the Apple Update service turned on, you can literally go in, turn the Apple Update service off, and turn your this specific web server on, and that's it. Your clients will never know the difference. It's great. Otherwise, you can point all of your clients to the server. So let's say, for example, you haven't had one set up before, because your clients are managed, right? You can go in and go in MCX and tell them where to go. So either that, or you can use Monkey. You can modify its stuff to tell it to point to this. And then I'm not going to go into this, but I figured it's worth mentioning because there apparently are a lot of people that actually do this. You can do some DNS hackery that basically any client in your, for lack of better terms, intranet, when it tries to resolve the swscan.apple.com, it'll resolve your server instead. So instead of having, like say for example, if you're EDU and you have 6,500 students on campus, and they all have Macs, for some reason you said, if you're coming here, you have a Mac, nothing else. So all these Macs are going out and getting updates independent of each other. That's going to take a lot of bandwidth going out. Well, you can have it redirect to your local server instead. I'm not getting into that. That's really advanced. There's a lot of tricks involved with that. So if you want to look it up, there are guides on how to do that, though. But there are stuff to keep in mind with that, so I didn't want to go into that. So, okay, so a few tips. In the website root, create symlinks. Make it easy on yourself. In the website root, create lion.su catalog and symlink it off to the actual catalog name, which is /content/catalog/other/ and then that. And it's all dependent on which OS you use. Like, they started, lion is lion, snow leopard, leopard. Snow leopard was lion, snow leopard. And mountain lion is mountain lion, lion, snow leopard, leopard. So it's, if you actually memorize that, great. I did at one point, and I don't really so much now since I haven't had to type it in a while. But yes, make it easier on yourself, create symlinks. If you're going out to clients and saying, no, I want you to point here, make it easier on yourself just to type the URL and then just lion.su catalog. And in this way, it goes right to the OS that it's responsible for. Keep plenty of space available. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's quite hefty, 55 gig, and I'm sure it's going to grow and grow and grow, especially as we get more updates for the recovery partition and just combo updates in general. It's going to take a lot, so keep some available. If you don't, again, you start kind of running into some file system issues. I think HOS is one of the better ones it deals with if you get above 90% full, but each one's a little different. So, and if you're doing this on another OS, the file system there's going to be different. You have to keep that in mind. So, I recommend syncing at least nightly. You don't have to. You could sync once a week if you want, once a month. It's all up to your organizational policy. If you wanted to sync every hour, you could. Apple probably won't be happy with you, but you could. There's nothing really preventing it. But at the very least, I would say nightly. This way, if you hear that some big update came out, you'll have it at night. Or if you want it immediately, you can run it immediately. You want to remove deprecated updates occasionally. One of the nice things that Reposado will do, which we will get into, is branches, in which case you can keep offering deprecated updates. So for example, when Apple releases 10.7.4, well, you still have clients with, say, 10.7.2. You can have them update to 10.7.3, but then offer 10.7.4 to your testing clients. So you can keep deprecated updates around if you want, but for the one-to-one replacements and that sort of thing, just get rid of them. You'll save a lot of space. For example, the recovery partitions, and I use that as a bad example because they're not actually the biggest, but they'll get deprecated because newer versions are going to come out to do different things. So delete the old ones. Obviously, your machines, if you allow them to or point to the default catalog, they're going to grab the latest of whatever's available. So why keep the old ones around if they're always going to pull the latest? Occasionally sync with -- recheck. I don't recommend this on a normal basis at all, but occasionally, if you have a weekend, don't do it on read-only Friday, because we all do practice read-only Friday, right? Saturday night or Thursday, middle of the week, whatever, just run it. Basically what it does is it goes through and checks all of the updates to see if there's anything changed on the Apple side. And if it changed, it'll bring it back down. But it goes through and checks every single update on the system. So it's not quite as bad as going out and re-downloading the whole thing, but it checks each one. So it takes quite a while.
What's it doing, a hash check?
I'm not sure really what it does in the background. I haven't really dug into the code yet for that. But
While it's doing that, is it still serving out software updates?
yes.
Okay.
The functionality between this code and what's actually being served is different. I don't think, and I'm sure Greg will correct me once this video gets out online, I don't think it touches the current indexes that are sitting on the system, but once it goes through, it'll do each version in steps. So it'll do 10.4 first, and 10.5, and 10.6, and 10, and so on. But it updates each one of those as it gets done. So you might have a slightly updated catalog for your 10.4 clients before your 10.6 clients. So, but again, you don't really want to run it all that often. I think recent times, the only time that people needed to run this was when Apple screwed up the SSL certs, or the package signing certs. And you basically needed to re-download all of the packages with the new cert. So I think that's the only time it's have to been used. But I do it occasionally when I think about it, pretty much. If you change your web server name or port, rerun the configuration. I ran into this, that the one server I was trying to do, which was actually a one-for-one update, I had found that I had the update service running and configured everything, and I tried to turn up Apache so that it was one-for-one port 8088. Well, it didn't spit any errors out back at me, but it never actually started running on that port. So what I ended up doing was, since it was kind of acting weird, I changed the port on the web server. I think I made it like 89 or something like that, just whatever the next step is. Okay, great. My clients can now access the repository, and everything seems to be perfectly fine. Except a week later, a couple updates came out. Went to go look on the clients, and none of them had the update. So what's going on here? Well, and this is probably newbie kind of issue, but when you run through the configuration and you specify the URL, if you don't specify it, you're basically telling Reposado that all the updates are still going to come from Apple servers. You're going to keep the catalog and tell the clients what they can get, but the actual updates themselves will come from Apple. That's different functionality that you can do here. I didn't get into it, but you can do that if you wanted to just have control over what updates are available, but you don't have the space to host all the updates. You can leave that part blank, it'll go out to Apple's stuff. But the reason that you want to change that is in the catalog, it writes out in there where to find the updates. So if you tell it it's available on port 8088 and you find it doesn't work and you're actually running on 8089, well, since there's nothing running on 8088, the clients can't get anything. So you have to go through, rerun that. Then once you do that, it takes a little bit, it's not too awful long. It'll go through, change that, and then all your updates can start, or all your clients can start downloading the updates. And you should be good to go. So, you have your server. You've been going on for a little bit now. Apple's released a couple of different updates, maybe an iTunes update, maybe 10.7.4 came out, maybe 10.6.9 magically came out. A couple different updates, and now you got a bunch of these deprecated updates in place, and you want to get rid of them to save space or for whatever not reason. So what I would say is, unless if you're using branches or otherwise want to keep the updates around, which could be any number of reasons, I would remove them just mainly to save space. You can keep them around if you really want to. You don't ever have to do this. It'll always still use the latest. But I recommend it. So To list the updates, you want to run that command, and the output will look something similar to that. Basically here, you have an update ID, which they can be at basically almost anything. A lot of them have the ZZZZ in front, some are just numbers. Then the name of what it is, and in this case, you see like there's 2 iTunes here. If you notice, it's the same one, different ID, but same version. That's difference between Lion, Snow Leopard, that sort of thing. But then the version of that update and when it was released. And if you noticed, most of these are released on the same day, which is when the new signed ones came out. So, but that'll list them for you. And then to remove them, you just have to run this command. Basically, when you want to handle the repository for Reposado, it's this repo utility command, repo util command. And that basically does all the functionality for your actual repo. In this case, the purge products, this will actually go through and remove it from the database, but then also delete the actual update on the file system. So you can go through, there's another one, I forget, I think it's just delete products. It will go through, it'll remove it from your catalog, but it'll leave the update still in the system. So that kind of defeats the purpose of doing that. But you want to do that if you have branches. So this is a little quick and dirty. I kind of pulled this from Nate's script, which I linked to in a little bit. Basically, it just iterates through all the deprecated updates and removes them, but only on the main tree. So if you're just doing the one-for-one update, it's only doing it on the default Apple updates. So you've heard me talk about it, this whole branches thing. This is probably one of the main features of Reposado that a lot of people are looking for. This is what allows you to offer different updates and have control to different clients and different updates to different clients. So you could have half the room have one thing and half the room have another. It all depends on which ones you point to. So I know I was talking to one gentleman over here that's, at least from what it seemed like, this is the main reason for this. Having control over what's being offered, when, how, who gets it, etc. This allows you to do that. So working with the branches, if you want to create one, you run the repo util, new branch, and whatever the branch name you could have. Typically, from what I've seen, a lot of people create a testing one. Obviously, if you're in your office, you have a whole bunch of machines, you throw in the testing one and make sure the updates actually work right for you. Because God only knows there's been so many Java updates that have broken FileMaker in many different fashions. But so test them first. And then when you want to add, let's say, for example, you want to bootstrap a branch. So let's say, for example, higher ed education. You have one big update server that everybody points to. Your academic clients point to it, your administrative clients point to it, all that kind of fun stuff. Well, typically you may not want to have all of your academic machines, especially if they have something like deep freeze, go and get new updates because they're just going to keep reinstalling them and reinstalling them. Or because of the academic year, you don't want to install a Java update because you don't know what's going to break. So, but you want to keep all your faculty machines up to date. So you can point your faculty machines to one branch, your academic to another. But when you branch off, at that point in time, you probably want both branches to have all of the updates that are available because at that point, they all have the same thing. That's perfectly fine. So instead of handpicking and adding hundreds of updates, you can just add all that's available at that time to that branch. You can do it multiple times. If in the future, one branch you just want to keep, constantly offering them all, you can just keep syncing to that. Or keep running this to just add all the products to it. To add a single product, you just run the add product. The ID, if you remember, it was that 04, it's actually this here. Typically it's like 041 something number, but you do that and the branch name. So if you're doing testing, you specify testing after that. That's actually what I did here. It's a lot smaller than what I was expecting to be on the screen. But if you have an academic branch, call it academic, throw it in there, that sort of thing. And then, as you can see here, when you run through, it actually builds different indexes. Basically what happens is when you create a branch, you get a file that's the typical name. So let's say, for example, the default 10.4 is just index.sucatalog. Now you have the index_branch name.sucatalog. So that's how you want to point all your different clients to the different branch. When you go to specify the catalog URL, you want to put in the URL and an underscore in the branch name. Whatever, actually I guess it would be the other way for you guys. So whatever the branch name is. If using the example that I just had before, if you have academic machines, they want different. You have an academic branch, you would do the typical index underscore and then the academic branch. And you just point your clients to that. So working with the branches. Symlinks work really well here too. Save yourself the time, because who wants to memorize something that long? Go through, create a symlink called, keeping along with what I was saying, academic.sucatalog, and point it off to, well, you're going to want to prefix it with the OS, because each OS is going to have a different catalog to point to. So lion underscore academic, dash academic, line academic, whatever you wanted to call it. L academic, academic. Kind of makes sense. But go through, do that, save yourself the hassle so that you just have that small URL to point to. To list the branches, if you have more than one person working in it, they may be experimenting, adding different branches. Just do the repo util -- branches, it'll list them all out for you. Very easy to then see what branches you have. If, say, for example, down the line, you might have had a branch for a specific lab, that lab goes away, well, that branch might be sitting there for another 6 months before you go, huh, I guess we should delete that. So when you're dealing with branches, deprecated updates need to be removed from each branch individually. So this is kind of one of the more tedious parts. If you go through and say add 10.7.3 to 10 different branches, well, 10.7.4 comes out, you've tested it, it's okay, you're going to push it all to all the machines that point to all those different branches. What you then need to do, if you're going to remove the deprecated update, is go through and remove it from each branch. So, and it's the same as before. When you go to delete, when you go to do the deprecated update, you just tag the branch name onto the end of the command. So when you do it and you have the product ID, you just put the branch at the end, and it will go through that branch and delete it from there. So some quick and some final thoughts, and then plenty of time for discussion, because I believe we're done at 1/4 and it's like 20 minutes left. So, which I think a lot of people are going to have some questions, so that's good. Reposado is a nice way to move away from Mac, I can't even say it, Mac, away from OS X server. Per your organizational policy, for some other reason, whatever it is. If you're moving away from server and you're trying to keep local updates, this is a good way to do it. Don't feel like setting it up yourself? There's a VM for that. I'm sure Jamf is thrilled that I'm mentioning this for them, but they have created a very nice utility. I haven't used it myself, but I hear it's absolutely wonderful, called netboot sus. And I think there's actually a slash in there. But basically what it does, it's an Ubuntu VM, pre-built for you as an OVH, that offers netboot functionality and software update functionality. And the software update functionality is based on Reposado. Greg apparently worked very close with them to get it all working. And the nice thing about this, they actually have a web GUI that you can go through and use to do Reposado, to manage the branches, what the updates are in it, all that kind of fun stuff. So the other thing is, if you are doing branches and you want a graphical way of doing it, this. Yes?
Well, it would make sense if you build this on a Linux box to have a webmin module.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what they use, but yeah, I don't think anybody's come out with anything for webmin yet, but
Because, if you install the HCP server on it and you add webmin there, you'll have the module to manage it. So
yeah.
it would be natural if you install that on a machine that's webmin, that the code would have.
Yeah, I'm not sure offhand if webmin does or not. I don't think they use webmin for this. I think this is kind of their own creation.
Yeah,
but
very similar to the Casper. It's sort of there.
he was nice.
There's
Yes.
also another web front end called Margarita.
Oh, that's right. That just was very recent.
That's pretty new.
Yeah.
It's not the same as Jamf. Jamf basically wrote their own graphical front end to it. But Margarita is another open source front end for Reposado that's fairly new.
I was hearing stuff about that, and I've been meaning to look into it. I just haven't had a chance yet.
Yeah, and it's also up on GitHub, so people can pull it down and use it as they want.
Well, then there you go. If you're setting it up yourself, you can use Margarito to go with your tequila.
But the Jamf solution must cost an arm and a leg.
No, it's free.
Yes.
Free.
No, actually,
No,
it's
free.
just
Actually free.
a VM out there. And actually, the code for it is actually now up on GitHub. So you can actually go out there and help modify it yourself, or I don't know, modify it yourself, but help.
Is it open so you can drill down to the file system?
At least that I'm aware of.
Yeah, you
So-
can, if you want to, you'll need to turn on SSH on it. But once you turn on SSH, you can go poking around. Or if you want to, you can try to do it all through, logging in through their,
The web interface.
yeah, basically, yeah. You've got three choices. One, you can just go to the essentially the console interface and try to navigate around that way. Or you can use the web interface, which doesn't get you underneath to the back end. Or you can go to the console, use Yum to install the SSH daemon, and then after that, you can just use SSH.
It would actually be apt-get in a bunch.
apt-get?
Yum
Oh,
is
you're right.
I think.
I'm too used to Red Hat.
Has anyone ported this to Red Hat by any chance?
Well, since you build it from the tar,
Well, yeah, Reposado you can throw on anything.
You can throw a Reposado on anything.
As for Jamf,
Products.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No, but with the stuff being out on GitHub, it would not be surprising if you could take what they have there and then build it into that. It may take some working and some modification because obviously file names and directories aren't going to be the same between the two. But I would not be surprised if it's not that hard to actually get it working. So, yeah.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
One is, if you have branches and you do the purge
Yes.
for the deprecated, it won't do it in all of the sub-branches.
I don't believe so. I could be very wrong in this. I haven't dealt too much with different branches yet. So at least myself and my experiences, from what I've seen, it doesn't. But I may have been an old version I was working on at the time that I noticed that. So.
My other question is, our university has an Akamai, So, in that way, do you think it's recommended for us to even cache stuff locally? I mean, we could just do the catalog, and then
Yeah.
it would still point out to Apple, but then it would be cached locally.
In that case, if your appliance is actually having the Apple updates on it, I'm not sure when you get a local cache hole what it includes, because I'm sure you'd need like 15 racks of SAN space to actually hold the entire Akamai catalog. Yeah, I would say if you actually have something on site like that, I would say just do catalogs. Don't bother doing local, like the actual updates locally, because it's already going to be fast because it's already on site. But then this way, when you do just the catalogs, you still have that fine-grained control. So you get the best of both worlds in that case. Yes?
Greg says that the purge affects products, and so it affects all branches.
Okay, well, there you go. That's true. IRC is available, which he is on occasionally. Been more recent.
He's on now.
Yeah, he popped in earlier. I'm sure you guys have been razzing me the whole entire time, so.
Yeah, but now you know, because this year we have logs.
Yeah. Well, see, my client's always on and always logs anyway, so. But it's fairly easy overall to set up. I'm just going to finish this real quick and then we can get back into question. It's fairly easy, especially if you are on an older version of server that for some reason you need to keep, like say OD. You have a huge OD infrastructure based on 10.5. Why not? That if you want to offer the updates out, great. Otherwise, if you're moving away from it, it offers that. So, and some references for you guys. So, any other questions, comments, concerns, razzings from IRC? Yeah.
If somebody had an Xserve G5 lying around, that'll work on the PowerPC, right?
Yep. It's,
As long as you know the space, because most have 8 drives.
yeah. I mean, if you have the space, if you can finagle the adapters to get bigger drives in, or even connect out to a SAN, it's just Python based. So I believe you'll definitely need to have 10.5, which I believe is Python 2.5, which does include the extra plist stuff. So it should work perfectly fine on an old server like that. Whether or not you want to waste that much power on something of just that's another story. But probably, I would say an old Mini would be perfect for it. But yeah.
Is there any issues with firmware updates, or they just handle like regular OS updates?
Well, this again doesn't apply for how the clients install it. This is just offering it up. This will pull down firmware updates. And this actually is very nice that if you find a firmware update's broken, for example, you can use the branches via this to stop your clients from getting that firmware update. And when you add and remove products, you can keep adding newer products in, but keep that firmware out. So you can add the new iTunes in, you can add the new OS version in. You can do all that, but keep that firmware out. Yes?
How automatic is this branch updating? Or do you have to, as new updates come down, do you have to then manually add those to you?
Branches, once you create branches, it's pretty much a manual process at that point. Once new updates come down, they'll sit in the main branch, which you can point to. That's just the default catalogs. You can point to that if you want. Don't need two branches or anything. But yes, if you want to add other products into the catalogs, or into the other branches, you have to specifically add them to it. And that's when things like the Jamf's product and Margarita come in really handy, because then it offers you a graphical way of saying, okay, these updates can go to this branch.
So say hypothetically we run PGP, and hypothetically we don't want people downloading OS updates, because hypothetically they don't want boot. Branches would
I don't
be
think
a
that's
way-
hypothetical.
Branches would be a way to prevent people from downloading until those have been vetted.
Yes, yeah. Basically what you can do is, like I said, at that point you can, if you create your image, you have your image at this point with these set of updates. You can then clone that point. Oh, and with branches, you can also copy branches too. So if you can copy off of that set that you have built. So if you have a set already made, you can then either copy that, clone that, you can add all the updates in up to that point. And then you can leave them pointing to that specific branch. And you can keep updating, you can do 6 months, a year from now, and never have touched that branch, and they'll only see the updates in that. And then you can add specifically like iTunes, Safari, Airport, all that kind of fun stuff. You can add those in so that part will stay updated, but it won't actually touch like OS version updates or firmware updates, anything like that. So yeah, it won't actually update until you tell it to be included in those branches.
And the pointing to which branch you can hand off in your directory settings. So if you have a lab that you don't want any updates to happen, you can set in the directory that these machines point to a branch that's highly restricted.
Yep, just as you would, like in Open Directory, you can specify the update server. You can do it in the monkey plist, manage preferences plist. You would just specify it, instead of pointing to just your server with the default index.html where it rewrites and all that fun stuff, you point it specifically to that branch. And in this way, it only looks to that branch for updates. And then if you don't necessarily put any updates in there, like you may add the security updates, because that's good to do. Or if you have a lab, for example, that's frozen, it's not going to matter. You really don't want to apply updates anyway. You can then, they're not going to do anything after that because they're only looking at that catalog. So everybody else can keep getting updated. Everybody else can pull that kind of stuff. All the other branches can do that. But unless if you go in and add more stuff to that, they'll never see anything else.
And, because you say this only does the Apple updates, but is there a way for you to generate your run package that you can insert into that?
No. This is only for updates from Apple. If you want to manage the third-party software, like say Firefox, for example, that's where Monkey and the like come in, which have their own repository and own way of handling that kind of stuff. So, yes?
So if you had, say, a lab that was frozen, didn't think permanently, if you're in there, could you, through ARD or something, tell it, okay, go check the main repository and test out of the branch, could you look at the main catalog? Move them all into the branch.
When you're sitting at the client, you can go in and modify the software update plist to point to a different catalog. So if you wanted to, sitting in, what's that?
You have to modify the keywords.
Yeah. Yeah, if you go in, but the nice thing is if you're already pushing that setting out to point to a specific branch, you can pull what's there and just copy and paste it and just remove that testing branch. So then you can run it and see what updates are available.
I think
So-
if you have a managed preference set to do it, you'll have to modify that or delete it all.
Yeah.
Or take, because otherwise it gets really sticky and irritating. Like, I can't either, why isn't it changing? It's just bad.
If you push,
You could also duplicate a branch, change it,
yes.
and then you could do the work at the server.
You could, but you would still have to change the client to point to that other branch. So,
Well, no, duplicate your branch, so you have backup of it.
well, yeah, you
Still
could do
look
that,
and
yes.
Change the original
Yes,
branch.
yes, you could do
Depending
that.
Depending,
But then-
yeah, pointing at that branch.
Yeah, but then the problem is, like, say if you're in a lab, then you're going to have 20 other machines looking at a branch that you're playing around with. So, but what he was referring to is if you have, like, say, Open Directory with managed preferences coming down, and you're forcing that preference out, that will take preference over the local file. So if you're doing that, you either want to modify that specific preference or change it there or remove it from being managed that way. If you only want one specific one time to be changed. So, any other questions, concerns? Yes.
Is there a good way to keep in tune with these updates other than just every once in a while checking Apple's software update yourself and then going into Reposado and updating your branches? Or?
One thing that I typically do is the log that it outputs to, I'll occasionally go in and look at that. Because what it'll do is if nothing was found, it'll just say rebuilding catalog. If updates were found, it will list, granted, it won't list them pretty-wise, but it'll tell you, like, you know, iTunes.pkg and that sort of thing were downloaded. So now the GUIs, like the Margarita and stuff like that, may have a better way of handling that. So, you gotta.
If you use that sort of DNS hacker to get people to look at your home Reposado service, but you're really only interested in managing Lion updates, for example, because 10.5 is pretty much done, 10.6
Yeah.
is pretty much done. Do you have to create branches for those since they're all coming to your server now? Because there isn't anything there for those
Yeah.
devices. What happens?
This is getting into the really advanced stuff. You can do some trickery with like if you're pointing back to Apache, you can do some trickery. It's not rewrites, it's redirects. That you could, when it looks for that catalog, you can redirect them to another server and just tell it that's permanently moved. So you could do that. It's not really recommended because one of the problems you'll have is like a circular loop because you'll tell it to point to SW update, Apple, whatever, which will then point back to you. And yeah. So like I said, doing that, for some people it's worked, but there's a lot of things that you have to consider when doing it. It's a very, very hefty topic in itself. It could be an entire presentation in itself. So.
It's nice because if you have an environment where the users are admins, you want them to be able to come into to your network and pull from your proxy, but you still want them to be able to at home over the weekend to do software updates without having to change with that P list all the time.
Yep.
So when they're at home, Apple resolves to Apple. When they're in your land, it resolves to your server.
I think I read that Greg does something where he doesn't change it in MCX what Apple software updates. So the sort of the standard Apple software update will still look at Apple's. But with Monkey, he manages it so that it points to his local Reposado server. So that way, if they're out in the field, their machine's going to check in, find updates, and count them once a week. Whereas with Monkey, once a day, it'll
We had that set up. I stopped working for a school board 4 years ago, but we had that set up. So we had a local machine, and we didn't modify any settings. But when you look for the Apple software update, it went to a Mac Mini we had somewhere, and it pulled it within our intranet. But it was
DNS trickery.
yes.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to point the Mac client to Apple directly when they're at home. You always want to point to Reposado because if an Apple update comes out, you won't be able to vet that or it hits the client machine. So
Yeah.
you lose control of updates once you point to Apple directly.
But it's
Yeah.
That's
trying to control it, or if you're just trying to manually.
Yeah.
yeah. Again, I said that's where the users are admins. That's
Download it themselves.
because if they're not admins, you don't let them do anything. That's the safe way. But if they're admins, it's their machine. They manage it. If they download an update that screws it up,
Yeah, it really all depends on what you want to do. In this case, like if you want extreme control over your machines, this allows you to have that. Versus, let's say, for example, you have, as I said with higher ed, you have 6,500 students coming in. You don't want necessarily all those 6,500 students going and downloading 10.7.4 overnight. That's going to take a lot of bandwidth up. So you can do that to point to your local instead. So it saves you bandwidth over your commodity internet connection. So. Yep. Yeah, you can even.
Servers always, always has, updates that whatever company name that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can do anything with it. You can expose it, as he was mentioning, you can expose it to the internet, and then no matter where your clients go, it'll always point back to your server. So, but then, all depends on what you want to do. So, but I think we're ending a little early, unless if anybody else has any other questions, concerns, comments, suggestions, apples to throw, tomatoes to throw, bananas maybe.
Slides.
Some ice cream. Slides. I don't know. I haven't been asked of where to put them yet. I think they'll get emailed and
we will be
put up.
collecting them from all the speakers, making them available as PDFs on the MacAdmins.edu site within the next 2 weeks.
So it'll be up there shortly.
Servers to get the speakers to get it to us, so that's always the trick.
Should I just email it to you then? Because I could do that in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Zip file, please.
Zip, PDF zip?
Sure.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
Easy enough.
Yep.
So, all right, well, if that's it, we're slightly early, which is always a good thing. So go out, get some jelly beans, get some drinks, breaks, whatever. Thank you for coming. And I'll be around, so.